Not until the arrival of the P-51B did the Allies have a fighter equal to the FW-190. Rugged and well-armed, the 190A became the premier fighter in Western Europe throughout the next 2 years.
It was far superior to the 109. Faster, higher, was better climbing, and could go in higher altitude and had more flying time. See, we had only 1 hour flying time. When we, in high altitude, 1 hour and 10 minutes, but it was all. They could fly it same as the P-51.
With its 4 20mm cannons and 2 machine guns, it proved to be the only single-engine Luftwaffe fighter that could effectively tackle 4-engine bombers. Its 4 cannon could inflict mortal damage to both the B-17 and the B-24. Later versions of the 190A, which had a wingspan of 34 feet and a length of 29 feet, could carry up to 8 20mm cannon, 4 in the wings, 4 in external gondolas. Such firepower had fearsome effects on Allied bombers. At low altitude, the Focke-Wulf's air-cooled 1,700-horsepower BMW engine could drive the fighter along at about 315 miles per hour. That was fast enough to outrun any Allied fighter of the day on the deck. It reached its optimum max speed at 21,000 feet, where it could sustain 418 miles per hour for short periods. If it had a weakness, it was its high-altitude performance. Above 25,000 feet, the 190 became sluggish at the controls. At any altitude, it couldn't outturn the Spitfire or the P-51, while above 25,000 feet, the P-47 Thunderbolt could turn in sight, as could the P-38L. Turning fights at high altitude usually ended in disaster for the German pilot foolish enough to get into that situation.
The P-47 would outdive anything. You didn't have to worry about shooting anything because you had more firepower than most of them did. And good offense is a good defense. They had a long-nosed 190 that turned out to be pretty good, but there wasn't any of them that really gave us any trouble that I remember. We got a lot of them in the air. We'd go out and get 36 in the air, and some 51 group would go out and get 15 or 20 on the ground. But one time we ran into a bunch of 190s, and I got 1, and we got 15 out of 20.
Later on, the 190D became the definitive variant. Dubbed the Long Nose or the Dora, the D model used a liquid-cooled engine and could fly almost as fast as any Allied fighter. The remaining defenders of the Reich in 1943 were the twin-engine heavy fighters, the Messerschmitt 110 and Messerschmitt 410. These aircraft carried awesome arrays of firepower. 20mm, 30mm, even 75mm cannon, heavy machine guns, and even GR-21 rockets.
By mid-1943, the Germans were becoming desperate to figure out ways to break up Allied bomber formations. And so what they did was they took a rocket mortar. Actually, it was basically a mortar shell with a rocket engine attached to it. They called it the GR-21, and they put one in a tube under each wing of their single-engine fighters. And they would go up and they'd take these rockets, and the actual tubes themselves would be angled upwards underneath the wing. Twin-engine fighters, by the way, could carry more than 2, but not many more. They would get up, they would fly behind the American B-17 and B-24 boxes, and they'd sit back. They'd have to fire from almost exactly 1,000 meters or 2,000 meters, something like that. There was a precise distance they had to be from behind the bombers. They would fire the rockets. The rockets would go up in this big arc, and if they had fired effectively, they would have dropped right into the combat box and then exploded. And they exploded based on a time fuse. So it was a very, very difficult attack to actually achieve, and trying to lob these mortar shells, basically, with these little rockets attached to them, into American bomber formations proved to be very, very difficult. It was a almost impossible task. But On the occasions where they did actually get the mortar bombs into the formations, they were devastating. They one explosion could take down 2 or 3 bombers. One of the things that the GR-21 did do, though, was it loosened up the bomber formations as the guys tried to get away from these falling rocket bombs.
With the bomber formations spread out, the 110s and 410s would then pounce on the strays, knowing that the defensive firepower the Americans possessed would be more diffused. The heavy fighters made excellent targets as they were big aircraft and not nearly as maneuverable or quick as the 109s and 190s. As a result, they took severe losses whenever they tried to get in close on tight bomber formations. When American fighters began appearing over Germany, the day of the 110 and 410 came to an end. Neither could stay in the air against the P-47, P-38, or P-51, and they were slaughtered wholesale. Eventually, they were withdrawn and used only as night fighters. When the air war over Germany began in earnest during the summer of 1943, the Americans ran into heavy opposition. As limited as the 109G was as an interceptor, when the B-17s weren't protected by their own escorting fighters, it could inflict heavy losses. Some 109 groups modified their fighters to carry an extra pair of 20mm cannon under the wings, giving them almost as much firepower as the FW-190. The Luftwaffe won the air war in 1943. The interceptor pilots savaged the 8th Air Force's B-17s and B-24s. Those first 12 months of the strategic bombing campaign cost the 8th Air Force an average of 33% of its crews and planes per mission. By October, the Luftwaffe had brought the mighty 8th to a crisis point. Either daylight bombing would have to be suspended, or long-range escort fighters had to be developed to destroy the German fighter force. Long-range fighters were brought in, and that turned the tide against the Luftwaffe. First, the P-38 arrived, fast, maneuverable, and able to stay with the bombers all the way to Berlin and back. The Lightning became the first strategic escort fighter in Europe. The Germans dubbed it the fork-tailed devil.
We knew that we were going to be top support for bombers. And at first we were at Nut Hampstead. We called it Mud Hampstead because that's the way it was. We were all new. In fact, that we were so new that when we went on a mission and we finally did turn our guns loose, they only fired 1 round or so. And we didn't know what the answer to this was, but they had frozen the oil, just plain machine gun oil, was too thick for the machine guns to reload themselves. So naturally, when we got home, we had to ask the bombers, "What do you do?" And they says, "Wash them dry."